this evening we've got maybe 20 or 30 minutes to walk through a little bit of a presentation, and we also want to talk about the goals for tonight. Talk a little bit about what a comp plan is, a future land use plan, which is really the focus of the discussion for this evening. And we'll move into a bit of a workshop. So there's some stations in the back of the room that we'll ask people for some focused input on. But before we go to the workshop, we'll go over some instructions. So I will turn it over to Kate. I'll turn it over to Sam momentarily. Okay. Right. But before I do, I just want to see if members of the Comprehensive Plan Update Steering Committee might raise their hands. I know there's many in the room. These folks are volunteers in the community who've been working diligently over the last many months on updating information for the town, and we're now getting to the point where we've got a good baseline of data, and we're really in the public participation and input process. So again, thank you for coming, and I'll turn it over to Sam for a little more introduction for tonight's activities.
This is taped, so. Hey everybody, I'm Sam Pikus with North Star Planning. So we've been working with the committee over the last 9 months or so since the spring of 2023 to update the comp plan. This is a rough timeline of where we've been and where we are right now. So we completed the inventory work, which is a lot of data highlights of different specific topic areas. We then completed the vision and values drafting, and now we're at the future land use workshop. So this is a long-range process, and we plan to finish up in the fall of 2024. So what is a future land use plan? So it is essentially the community's vision on a map. It consists of a future land use map and a narrative. And this is not a zoning map. It's very high level and long-term. And essentially it outlines where the community wants to see development and what areas the community wants to protect and preserve. So the purpose of tonight's workshop is to tie the vision together with the geography to help inform a detailed picture of what people will experience in different parts of town. So generally by state statute, the future land use plan map shows 3 general areas: rural, transition, and growth. So this shows really a spectrum of most protection from impacts of development to the most change in investment. A lot of times critical rural is mixed in there as well. This is places that really deserve the greatest protection from development. And then on the other end of that spectrum is growth, which is really the places that you see a lot of change and investment, new infrastructure, and really places where a lot of people will meet their daily needs in town. So much of the future land use plan is based on what we heard from previous work on the online survey and in the first in-person workshop, where we really established visions and values of Raymond. And those include some of the following. So natural resources, the town is known for its many lakes and open spaces, the quiet rural living, traffic congestion, a lot of roadway improvements like sidewalks and bike paths, and then also really a need to strengthen a sense of community. So some things to consider when planning for the future is looking at past development. So based on building permit data, over the last 8 years or so, there have been a total of 258 building permits issued for new development, and most of these were for residential construction, and of that, a lot of these were single-family properties in the shoreland zone, and only two building permits were issued for commercial construction. And generally, there's been very little growth along 302 and Main Street, which is where a lot of current development exists today. So based on that, we're projecting about 150 to 200 year-round housing units in town over the next 20 years. And this is based on the population projection from the inventory work we did. There's also likely going to be a demand for at least 100 new seasonal housing units. So with that in mind, how do you adequately plan for growth, and where will these new developments take place? And this leads us into really what we're here to talk about tonight, which is scenario planning, which lays out a framework and different ways to view Raymond's future and to view where development will take place.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, hi everyone. I'm Kate. So I'm going to talk about future land use scenarios. So the idea behind tonight's workshop is to pose a few different scenarios based on the vision and based on the data of what could be a plausible future for the town, and think about the future recommendations to fit a range of different possibilities. So we're going to show 3 different scenarios. One is conservation focused, one is focused on the idea of villages, and one is focused on Raymond's transportation corridors. And all 3 of these scenarios are focused on one topic, so they're all going to go a little too far. We're not here to vote on what scenario we like best. The idea is to sort of take one important idea for the town and develop it and see what people like about it and see what you don't like about it. And you're going to give us feedback on all of these. So around the room, after we finish, we have maps and descriptions of each scenario available that you'll be able to give us your feedback on. We might have to kind of take turns looking at the crowd here tonight, but we'll get to that. So what I'm going to do is go through each of these scenarios, and then we'll have some time for Q&A, and then we will let you respond to all the activities. So the first scenario we're going to talk about is the conservation focus. So natural resources are really important to the town of Raymond, to the town's identity, to the economy, to the reason why people live here. So the idea behind this scenario is to protect natural resources as much as possible. So if I can get the laser pointer. Yeah, so all these areas in green around the lakes in North Raymond and along Raymond Cape, these are all areas of critical rural, the highest level of protection for these natural resources. And the red down here around 302 and the border with Wyndham, that's the only growth area in town. So the idea behind this scenario is, what if we concentrate all the new growth that we can, the majority of it, into existing areas of development and strictly limit new development in the more rural and shoreland areas in order to protect them as much as possible.
What does yellow represent?
That's supposed to be light green, sorry. So that is supposed to be just sort of status quo rural, so kind of the sort of single family homes development that's there now. And the maps that are around the room have a big legend on them. We just cropped them to fit on the slide. So thinking about each of these scenarios has impacts on different aspects of Raymond. So with this scenario, in terms of land use, we're minimizing the impact of development on lakes and ponds and habitat areas and currently undeveloped land. In terms of infrastructure, this would probably require some investment in wastewater treatment in a growth area if you're going to have more and more growth around 302. In terms of transportation, the idea here would be to really limit the impacts of development, so no new public roads in these rural areas, and maybe focus, which is what these black lines are representing, maybe focus on building a network of year-round trails that people can use, both snowmobiles in the winter, maybe mountain biking and walking in the summer to get around town. And here, open space, we'd be thinking about new access to water bodies in Raymond and open spaces, both in terms of town-owned land and in terms of partnerships with private landowners who might provide easements or other types of access to their land. The economy impacts of this scenario is, more of a focus on Raymond's outdoor economy. Can we build that part of the economy? You already have a lot of summer camps and businesses that support people enjoying the outdoors. This also supports people working remotely, and that most people who live in Raymond will continue to travel to 302 or Wyndham or other areas to meet their daily needs. And in terms of housing, this concentrated growth area would give us some new opportunities for multifamily housing or senior housing. But the rest of Raymond would continue to be primarily large lot single family homes as it is now. And we would continue to have or even strengthen regulations on shoreland development. So the next one is villages. So this scenario is based on the history of Raymond. Raymond used to have a number of small villages throughout town. In addition to the Main Street village here, there used to be a post office on Raymond Cape and a school and a store. There was a post office and a couple stores along Webb's Mills Road, and even a few things up in North Raymond. So the idea in this map is that we have the 302 growth area, which is a little more dense and auto-oriented like it is today. And then we have these villages throughout town that, these purple ones, like on Raymond Cape and North Raymond, these are really just rural crossroads where you might see a couple stores, but based on the idea of having multiple centers of activity around town that bring amenities closer to everyone where people live. So in terms of land use, I kind of said this already, but growth along these village nodes. So we'd be directing growth into these discrete villages around town. In the village areas, we might want to promote things like shared parking. So you could drive and park once and then walk around the village to access maybe a few different stores, restaurants, things like that. And then also these big green areas are conserving large blocks of land since we're directing growth into the villages. In terms of infrastructure, again, we'd probably need to think about some kinds of advanced wastewater if we're going to have denser development in all these areas, because the town doesn't have a sewer system. And then for transportation, the idea is that we would improve roads and sidewalks and bike lanes in the villages. So these circles show you, the smaller circle is a half-mile walking radius from each village, and the bigger circle is a 1.5 mile biking radius from each village. So the idea being that, you could walk or bike to each of these village nodes from where you live if you live relatively close to them, which covers a good part of the town. And with concentrated growth, there's the potential that we could have some kind of maybe senior transport van or van pool service to help people maybe get from here to here to here. And also in regards to open space, in addition to preserving these large blocks of land, there would also be parks and public spaces within these growth areas. Growth doesn't mean only growth. It also means, investing in parks and places for people to gather. In terms of economy, this scenario would promote the idea of having new neighborhood scale, so smaller businesses and services in the villages where residents can meet their daily needs. So maybe a sandwich shop or a barber shop or a coffee shop, or you can grab a carton of milk in some of these village areas, which would create new local jobs. This would also provide the opportunity to increase the diversity of housing that's available in Raymond. You could have larger scale multifamily buildings in 302, and then maybe some smaller multifamily buildings in the villages to supported by the infrastructure and businesses that are there. And again, all of this is, you're gonna see maps as well as descriptions of all of this when we go into the activities, so you don't need to remember everything I say. And the last one that we have is the transportation corridors focus. So the idea with this scenario is to have less concentrated growth with a growth area in red along 302, village growth areas around Webb's Mills Village and Main Street Village. And then these yellow are transition areas. So areas where you're not going to see a ton of growth, but also they're not rural. We're not going to protect them like a rural area. And the idea of this scenario is to have sort of less concentrated growth, improve how we get around Raymond, and then the most of Raymond will kind of be status quo, how it is now. So this would see, like I said, growth around Raymond's major roads, so 302, 85, 121. The need for sewer and water infrastructure in this scenario is minimized because the growth is more spread out. The investments in transportation would be in both improving roads to improve traffic congestion and the ease of people getting around, and also sidewalks and bike lanes, and probably thinking about things like a separated multi-use path, something where people could walk or bike along 302 without being actually on the road, investments in something like that to make it easier for everyone to get around town, whether you're walking, driving, biking. In terms of economy, we would still see Route 302 being the destination for larger stores and services. Maybe Webb's Mills and the Main Street Village would be more for local businesses, you know, your convenience store, coffee shop, sandwich shop kind of place, with improved transportation that connects Raymond's commercial and industrial areas. And in terms of housing, this would provide opportunities for larger scale multifamily and senior housing along 302, and some smaller scale multifamily buildings in the other growth areas. And then the majority of Raymond would be status quo. So we're gonna take some questions now, but those are the three scenarios. Like I said, we're not asking you to vote. You're not supposed to pick one. We want you to take a look at each one and tell us what you like and don't like about all of them. And we're going to take all that feedback and work with the committee to turn it into a more nuanced future land use plan that will help guide Raymond in the future. So around the room, there are those three stations for each scenario. We also have some blank maps of Raymond in case you feel inspired to draw your own scenario. And we have a copy of the vision statement that the committee drafted that you can put some comments on. And yeah, I'm just gonna ask the Comprehensive Plan Committee to raise your hands one more time so everyone can see who's in there. Yeah, so if you have questions about the Comprehensive Plan project, please feel free to ask one of us or ask someone who's on the committee. Yeah, so I think with that, we will take some questions if people have questions.
Is there a plan at all that keeps the concentration away from 302? Because right now, 302 is one of the biggest issues. It's the main corridor into our town, and living off 302, many days it's very hard to get on and off it. So it sounds like you're trying to concentrate everything to 302, where Raymond's pretty large, and us that live close to 302 don't want to see that.
It's a nightmare to try to get on and off in the summertime.
Yep, that's a good point. I think that what you'll find in each of these scenarios are what you think are really good ideas and some really bad ideas. We want you to react and say, this is good about this scenario and this is bad about this scenario. I think they all started with two things. We tried to make these plausible, realistic futures, and we started with the vision statement, the draft vision statement that the committee has drafted, and maybe we can bring that up for the duration of the workshop. But there's a number of values and key things we want to keep in mind that are important to the overall community. Each of these do a reasonable job implementing some of them. Like Kate said, each scenario doesn't address the entire vision at once. They focus on things. The other thing we started with, besides the vision statement, was existing land use. So given that a lot of the larger scale commercial activity is on 302 today, each one of these scenarios starts with some kind of growth area on 302, whether it's a concentrated village or a less concentrated wider area. That may be something that people in this room want to move away from. I think that there's room for that in this discussion, but again, you'll see us start with a growth area on 302. Sometimes it's one of them, the whole of 302 was a growth area. And the other scenario, it was much smaller, kind of from Panther Run down to the town line with Wyndham. So if that's still too large or it's not in the right place, that's the kind of thing we're hoping to hear tonight. Sir.
How would you protect the environment, all the water resources that are going into our lakes and ponds right next to Route 302?
And 85.
I mean, they're key to our future, they're key to the money that comes into town every summer. So I think
Yeah.
that has to be a...
Yeah, I think that's, I know that lakes and ponds are really important here, and in the conservation scenario, we put, I think, even bigger than the current buffer is around the lakes and ponds would have critical rural protection. And I think when you talk about infrastructure and investments, if we're going to be investing in 302 or 85, that would probably also include the kind of investments in stormwater infrastructure and other kinds of infrastructure that would help protect water quality even as a town grows.
We'll take a couple more and
Okay.
we can have some more.
I might need to move some of this stuff up here. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
What happens if 302 gets 4-laned?
I think, I can't answer really specific questions about 302. This is a little more big picture. Where do you want to see?
I know, but I mean, if 302 gets 4-laned, which I can see coming at some point down the road, it sort of throws a monkey wrench into some of these plans for what we want to have land use to be.
I think that's why it's important for Raymond to have a comprehensive plan. So this plan is something that the town will hopefully approve after it's drafted. And then this is something that the town, when the town works with the state, with the Department of Transportation, with neighboring towns like Wyndham or Casco, this is the document you point to and say, Raymond's vision for the future is not that. Raymond's vision for the future is this. And I know the town of Wyndham has done a lot of planning and is trying to, and these things happen very slowly, but is trying to implement some changes along 302 in North Wyndham to make it less intense. All right, I'll take a couple more. Yeah, go ahead.
Did I hear you correctly that in the corridors you're not anticipating any new roads?
I
Did you say that?
in the critical rural, in the conservation scenario, we would be limiting new public roads in the rural areas. So you want to, when you're trying to protect maybe a critical rural zone, we're trying to limit development there, limit the impacts of development, and limit kind of hard infrastructure where we can.
Yep. Couple of questions. North Star did a survey back in October, and it was asked of the citizens, the biggest threat to the quality of life in Raymond, number one by far, over 70% said too much development. My question is, who's advocating for this growth in the village area? Is it just a few developers? Is it the people of Raymond? Who is it?
I think the goal of this workshop and the phase of the plan we're in right now is to have a community conversation about where we want to see growth and where we don't want to see growth in the future. So, we know there will be demand for more housing in Raymond. We know there's demand for housing now. There's demand for seasonal housing. So the goal of this conversation is to talk about, what are we going to do about that? Where do we want to see growth? Where do we not? Where do we want to protect? And sort of being prepared to address what is coming in the future.
Kate, will the
Yeah.
presentation be on the website?
Yes, it will, and I think we're being recorded, so we'll have a video. We'll split into activities. We're going to try and filter people around the room, and we will be available to continue to answer questions to people, but I want to make sure we have time to get through everything. Traffic lights.
I remember when we were building, question that because of other things and we had happened or not happened. Took a while to get there. I already wrote it down.
So none of these villages are drawn to exact parcel boundaries because at this stage we're trying to keep it high level. So the idea with this one is to cover the existing area along 302 and then some space up here that I know the town has public water infrastructure around here.
302 traffic issue. You know, it's has so much to do with the influx and outflux of vacation rentals.
I know.
Some point they would shut the doors if they might be standing room only as it is. So, right
Yeah, into our property. Yes, I'm Charlotte Rose.
It's a considerable waterway because you're surrounded by water.
But I live in the middle. But I have a pond, right? See, the pond's not even listed there. How can they miss the pond? They didn't even include it.
So the idea is that you create corridors to get through town, get around through town, and those corridors are made for better, safer travel.
These are all historic locations that used to exist in the past, not really exist now. I think like they already there. Yeah, they're